This is Vincentt Craft Sutton interviewing Tony Welborne for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. It is 10:12 a.m. on March 17th, 2026. This interview is being recorded at the home of Tony Welborne in Greensboro, North Carolina. Mr. Welborne, could you please state your full name and what your relationship is to WNAA?
Yes, my name is Tony Welborne. I was one of the original students who helped build A&T's first radio station as a student back in 1966. And the radio station has progressed throughout the years and changed call letters, changed power levels, and those type of things. But I worked with the station until I retired in 2025, in June of 2025.
Thank you. So, if I'm correct, you are from Salisbury, North Carolina. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. How would you describe Salisbury growing up?
It was a little small town with, how do I put it, delicately. It basically was run by the Klan. That's the best I can put it. The sheriff was a Klansman. The police chief was a Klansman. So, we lived that way, knowing that we lived among people who really didn't care for us that much. But, among our community, it was great. We had lots of families, and most of the families that were two-parent families, most of them. So it was a typical black neighborhoods, and I say that with an S, because you had one side of the tracks and then you had the other side of the tracks, and I lived on the opposite side of the tracks where there wasn't a lot of people with a lot of money on my side of town. So the other side where the people who taught at the college and places like that lived, and we were a lot of just working class people on my side of town.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your family. Like you mentioned you were on one side of the tracks. Mm-hmm. Tell me about, the household that you grew up in and how your family was.
Well, like I said, I have two brothers. Well, I had two brothers. My oldest brother has passed. But growing up with the three of us, three boys, and my mother and my father worked for Southern Railway, which was very unusual for that particular time. But he worked with the railway until he retired. So, and my mother worked various types of jobs. She cleaning people's houses and things of that nature. But, and some of the industries that were around, there weren't a lot of them, but sometimes she'd work with them. But for the most part, she was a domestic, as they called them in those days.
Yeah, understood. You mentioned you had two brothers. Mm-hmm. What were their names?
Robert was my oldest brother. He's the one that passed away.
Okay.
And Freddie, who still lives, and he lives in Maryland.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And what's your relationship like with them?
Oh, we were always close. The three of us were like the three musketeers. But there was a vast age difference between us. So, as my oldest brother Robert, he graduated from A&T. He moved on and went into the military, in the Air Force. So they just left Freddie and myself at home. And then as Freddie graduated, he went to A&T. And then he went into the Air Force, so that just left me there. I was the baby boy, as they say. So I went to A&T, and same thing when I got graduated from A&T. I went in the Air Force too. So the three of us all served in the military.
Okay, I'll put a pin in that because I definitely want to talk more about that your service in the military. But you mentioned there were two black communities. Were there any institutions that brought the two communities together, or were there were there separate spaces for?
Well, there were two high schools. Well, actually, there were two grammar schools and then two high schools. One was in the county and one was in the city. And we lived in the city, so everybody, if you went to high school, everybody went to Price High School. No matter what side of town you lived on, you had to go to Price. If you lived out in the county, you went to Dunbar High School. But the county and the city were different in terms of, because there was a big difference big distance between the black communities in the county and those in the city. So, but we were kids. We all got along pretty good. There was always competition between the schools, but as far as high schools are concerned and elementary schools are concerned, if you lived on the east side of town, you went to Lincoln High School. If you lived on the west side of town, as I say, which is a more prosperous side of the black community, you went to Monroe Street School. But everybody went to Price High School.
Okay. So what was it, what was it like going through school? Like, what were the things that if you were interested in school, what were the things that interest you while you were, going through the K-12?
Well, once I got to middle school, what we call it, we didn't call it middle school then. It was middle school, and then they had junior high school, that type of thing. Me and my best friend, we became best friends, Guy Lofton. We both were in the band, in the high school band, and we were still in middle school because we could read music, and there were very few. A lot of students could play instruments, but all of them couldn't read. And the band director at the high school needed students who he could move from the middle schools on up into the high school band. And the high school band was very popular in Salisbury at that time. So he wanted people who could read music because he liked classical music. And he wanted to expose the students to classical music. So because we could read it, he brought us on from the middle school, and we stayed in there until, in fact, my friend Guy and I, we stayed together until he passed away back here about 10 years ago. We were in the Air Force together. We were roommates at A&T, and, we were just best friends forever. But it was different because he lived on the west side of town. Like I said, and I lived on the east side of town, what they call Dixonville. But we were best friends, and that was rare that you'd have best friends from the other side of town. So, but that was how it was growing up in Salisbury. And of course, we all walked to school. So we had to walk. It was almost a mile from my house to Price High School. So I had to walk to school every day until I got old enough to drive. And my dad would let me take the car occasionally. But, you could put a quarter of gas in the car and drive forever in those days. Gas was a quarter a gallon, so that wasn't too bad. So if you had $1, you could ride for a week.
Much different. So you mentioned earlier, essentially Salisbury was run by the Klan. Growing up, were there any issues, maybe aside from that the community was really kind of rallying around while you were growing up in Salisbury?
You mean as far as the Klan is concerned?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. They used to bring crosses in our backyard, basically, because there was this big field behind our house that I think the city owned the property. Nobody ever really knew. But my father used to grow crops and things back there during crop season, but nobody ever said anything to him about it. But occasionally, they'd have Klan rallies back there, and the sheriff would come by the house and say, "Now, Robert, we're going to have a Klan rally this weekend, so keep them pickaninnies in the house." That's exactly how he would put it. Now, as a young kid growing up, you hear that, and that hurts, especially to hear the sheriff call your daddy by his first name. But that was the way it was done. And they'd pile up down there, and they'd burn crosses there in the neighborhood, and we'd have to just sit there and peep out the window and look at them. But that was life. Mm-hmm. I was doing the interview yesterday with a person about something else, and I was telling them that sometimes it's hard to talk about it, but when we would go downtown to the little area, sometimes the stores would close the bathrooms, the colored bathrooms, on the weekends, because that's when they knew most of the black people would come downtown, because during the week they were working. Mm-hmm. Okay? And when they closed the bathrooms on the weekends, then if you had to use the bathroom, you had to find an alley somewhere to go. And I remember when sometimes having to stand there at the alley and watch my mother go down one of these alleys, to go down there and use the bathroom because she couldn't get in any bathrooms in the stores. And, as a kid, that hurts. You watch your mother do that. But it was stuff like that you'd learn to grow up with. We had the white fountains, the colored fountains, and like I said, you go in and you want to drink a water, and they'll there's a sign that says colored out of order. They just turn off the valve. But they just did stuff like that too. And a lot of people who didn't go downtown a lot of times they never noticed those things because they just didn't go down there that often. And if they went, it may not be one of those days when that kind of thing was happening. So, but if you went down there often enough and walked through town, and as a teenager, we used to go down there and walk through town, and we see that kind of stuff. But it was the way it was growing up in Salisbury. That's why I say the Klan ran the town.
Yeah. Was there ever any pushback from the black community?
Not really, because in those days it was basically you do what they say do and don't look them in the eye when you're talking, that type of thing. And most people nowadays, they hear about that or they read about it, but they never really lived it. Like I said, I'm almost 80 years old, so I know about this stuff firsthand. It makes a difference in terms of how you grow up. I remember my mother worked for this lady named Miss Yost. I think it was Yost. Clean her house 6 days a week. But when it would get dark, sometimes on my way, I'd go down there. When my brothers had moved on to college, I'd go down there and walk her home. But I'm sure she worked with that lady for about 10 years, and I never got a chance to go in her house. I wasn't allowed to go in there. When I'd go down, I had to sit outside on the back stoop on the steps and just wait on Mama to finish, no matter what kind of weather it was. It was raining, snow, heat, whatever. That was as far as I could get to that house was on those back stairs, and I'd just sit there and wait, my oldest brothers probably did the same thing. They just never talked about it. But when I got to the point where it was time for me to kind of walk home with Mama, that's where I did it. So,
yeah, it's a lot of history. It seems like is not necessarily taught or talked about anymore.
No, and like I say, most of the people my age who lived through it either don't want to talk about it or they're no longer around. So the only thing they ever know about it is something maybe someone put in a book or they see in a movie somewhere. But to actually live that type of stuff every day. I remember my friend Guy mentioned when we were in college, he had a really bad toothache. And we went to Salisbury to a dentist in Salisbury who he could see. And this dentist gave him kerosene to rinse his mouth out with. That was his way of deadening the pain. And, I went with him. Like I said, we were best friends, roommates. So I went down, I'm sitting there watching. He had a special chair, dentist chair on the back porch of this building that he was in. It was an old house. But, it was a nice dentist office, but it was an old house. And he had a chair on the back porch for the coloreds, as they say. And when he got ready to pull Guy's tooth, he told him, swish your mouth out with this. And I knew as soon as he opened it up, it was kerosene. You could smell it. That didn't do anything. That wasn't any kind of anesthetic, but he figured he didn't know any better. And he sat there and he pulled Guy's tooth with that kerosene, and it infected. Tooth got infected for a while. They finally ended up going to a dentist in Greensboro to get it taken care of. But like I say, those are firsthand things that you deal with. That what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I'm kind of speechless. As a historian, you hear these stories,
right.
But to hear them kind of firsthand, it's a different feeling.
Yeah, it is.
Well, to kind of switch gears and make this a little lighter,
I didn't mean to get too heavy.
No. We appreciate that. Again, these are stories that need to be told.
Mm-hmm.
Was there music playing in the house when you were growing up?
Yes.
What was the?
Well, we used to listen. There were no black radio stations. Those stations in Salisbury that played black music. Not at first. There was never a black radio station, but one of the local stations did allow a couple of guys to do black music on Saturday nights. In fact, that's how I really got interested in radio, because I used to go over there and, like you see on TV, watch them, and they let me in there, and I'd sit there and watch these guys doing it, and I said, I'm going to do that one day. That's what I want to do. So that's how I actually got started in radio. Eventually they started allowing me to work the board when they would go out back and get a little refreshment, But but we had music, and of course the one station that most black people in Salisbury listened to was WAAA out of Winston-Salem. It was an AM station that actually reached Salisbury. It had pretty good signal from Salisbury into Salisbury. So we grew up listening to this guy named Daddy-O, Bobcat. These were the names of the people who were the announcers. So there was always music in the house. And my oldest brother, Robert, he learned to play the trumpet. So he was in the high school band. And, of course, like I said, I played trumpet. I was in the high school band eventually. But my brother, Freddie, he was never a big music person. He likes music, don't get me wrong, but at home that wasn't his thing. But he listened to the radio, and that's about it. But
So was working the radio station, was that like your first? Could you call that your first job?
it wasn't really a job. It was just something they let me do.
Okay.
Okay. Because like I say, I couldn't do it officially. If any of the white owners had come in there, they probably would have fired everybody, fired the guys, because they let me do it. But what it was, I had listened to the announcers on WAAA out of Winston, and these two guys were on radio in Greensboro. It was the first time for a long time. I didn't even know they were black at first. Okay, I mean, they were very articulate gentlemen. So I went out there one day just to peep in the window and see who they were. When I saw it was black guys, and then I'm like, wait, I got to do this. So it was really impressive to me to actually see black people on the radio, because I had been listening to their little show they run. It was like a 2-hour show on Saturday night. And it was interesting to finally meet and see what somebody's voice you would hear coming out of the radio. Because up until that, most people never went to a radio or television station. So that was kind of inspirational to me, and that's what I stuck with for a while.
Nice. So kind of going forward and backwards at the same time, you mentioned both Robert and Freddie went to A&T. Is that what made you decide A&T is the place for you to go as well?
Kind of, sort of. Mainly because I was always interested in electronics. And I had a scholarship to Florida A&M that I had earned. But I wanted to go to A&T because Florida A&M didn't have any electronics school. They didn't teach electronics. And my dad had basically cried. He was like, come on, you guys. But I ended up going to A&T because Mama said, let that boy go do what he wants to do. And Mama said that was it. So I went to A&T to study electronics.
And you said Dad wanted you to go to FAMU?
Yeah, he went because he was thinking about the money. He said, if you get out of FAMU, then I don't have to pay that money, tuition. Yeah. And, tuition wasn't that high compared to what it is now, but to them, that was a lot of money. So, but he didn't. He just like, no, you need to go to FAMU. And I'm like, no. And my dad didn't even know where FAMU was. He just knew I had a partial scholarship. So that was his thing. But A&T, of course, he knew about that because he'd already put 2 boys through A&T. So.
What was your experience like at A&T?
It was great. I enjoyed A&T. I really did. I love A&T. I've always loved it. Like I said, I had excellent instructors. The things I learned at A&T helped me get through the military, get finish up my electronics school in the Air Force much faster because they were teaching these guys basic stuff that I had a degree in. So it was like I could just take the test and test out of the classes. So that helped a lot. On top of that, I had worked at a company in New York City. My uncle lived in New York, so I'd spend summers up there with him. And I worked at this company called Andrea Electronics. And I got a job just working with these electronic circuit boards, but I had no idea what they did, and they wouldn't tell us because it was a military contract, so they wouldn't let us know what. We just work with them, put them together. And then I got a peep in a back room one day, and I saw these people in with all these instruments in there, oscilloscopes and meters and stuff. So I asked the guy one day about what they did back there, and he told me. He said they test these things to make sure they work. Once you all put the circuits together, then they test them and make sure that they work. And I said, I want to get in there, Of course, he was like, well, no, you got to know something about electronics. I got a degree in electronics. Okay. He took me back there and gave me a board and told me to test it, and I tested it out and told him what was wrong with it, what wasn't wrong with it, what worked, and that type of thing. So he let me work back there. But I still didn't know what that equipment did. Okay, I just knew how it worked. But when one of the classes I had to take when I got in the military, when I was in electronics school in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I roll my eyes when I say that. That was not an easy time. That's for another day. But one of the classes I got in, this instructor brought this piece of equipment. I said, y'all got to learn how to fix this equipment because it goes in aircraft. It goes in airplane. I took one look at it and I knew what it was. I'm like, I fixed these things before. All right. So I told the instructor that, and he's like, no, this is military stuff. You haven't touched this. I told him, I said, if you open it up and look on the left-hand side of the back cover, and you'll see a word, you'll see a company product name in there, Andrea Electronics. He already knew it was there. So he's like, how you know this? I told him I'd worked there. And so he had me assisting other students, teaching them how to repair the equipment. So that was something I passed. I was able to pass through that class easily. So it all helped out.
Nice.
But, A&T, everybody, especially if you're around this area, I mean, it's a fun time, especially the homecoming. You enjoy that, the football games and stuff. So, and you always had Bennett College right across the street, which was all girls school. So, but A&T was fun.
Yeah. So was there, because you were at A&T from when to when?
From 1964 to 68.
So you were 4 years in, or you got there about 4 years after the initial sit-ins of the Greensboro Four. What was the political environment like on campus while you were there?
Well, it was still very active because we still had a lot of people coming to campus to speak to students and encourage them to keep it up and keeping them going on. So I met a lot of people. In fact, as I can't remember the lady's name who first started talking to me about your project here. I don't know if I heard it.
Phyllis.
Yeah, I think her name was Phyllis. I told her that as students, and once we had built our radio station, we had a director, Dr. Lois Kenny, that the university wanted us to have someone in charge of us. Because we were just technology students. We just knew how to make it work and was enjoying playing with it. But they brought her on to keep us in line. So she would teach us how to articulate things of that nature. But she had worked in a station in Chicago years before. She started teaching at A&T. So she knew a lot of these people in the civil rights movement. So she would invite them, when they would come to campus, she'd talk to them and have us get us permission to record them. So we recorded Dr. King, Bayard Ruskin, Ralph Abernathy, all of the big people of the civil rights era. And what was ironic, we had one big recorder in the radio station. It was called the Ampex 600. This thing weighed like 30 pounds. And we had to carry it over to the auditorium where they would come and speak. Well, we didn't have any cars, so we had to drag this 30-pound thing over there every time we went over to record. And she would insist, Dr. So-and-so is going to be there. This person, you got to go record it. And, it was 7-inch reel, so we go with a bag full of 7-inch tapes and record these conversations and speeches that they were giving. And then we bring them back to the station and play them on the air. Well, I'm sure you didn't realize that editing reel-to-reel tape that's not an easy job. It's slice and dice and that type of thing, put the tape together and glue it back together. So we rarely edited any of them. We might edit some at the very beginning where we're just sitting with the tape running before they started or something. But one of the lady who worked in the library, and I can't remember her name, it's been too long ago, she heard one of them on the air one day, and she said, what do y'all do with these tapes when you're done with them? You don't erase them, do you? We said, oh, no, man, we put them on the shelf. She said, well, can you make a copy for me to keep in the archives of the library? And we were like, well, yeah, that'd be fine. We talked with Dr. Kent, and she says, that's the best thing since sliced bread. Yes, make a copy. Well, making a copy, that was a one-to-one thing. You got to sit there with two machines, and we didn't have but one machine. So we would just send her the originals. Once we had aired them, then we send her take them over there, really, and she put them in the archive. And Dr. Kennedy said, well, see, that's the best place for them because those things will be there in perpetuity. They'll always be there. Wrong. Years later, when A&T they built a new library. And they moved from the old Bluefield Library to the new Bluefield Library. Some brain surgeon decided that was trash. And they threw all of those tapes away. I'm like, how do you take archive material and throw it away? So we don't tell them what other kind of archive material is thrown away. But all of our tapes, original tapes of those people making those speeches, like I say, including Dr. King, and I can't even remember all of them. Stokely Carmichael, we recorded him, A. Brown, you name it, we had these tapes. And because we were electronic students, we had great, excellent recordings. I mean, they were crystal clear. Our instructors made sure that you know how to work this equipment and you record good stuff. Because we would go in and plug it into the PA system in the auditorium. They were all gone. And when she was putting this project together, she first started talking to me about that. And I'm telling her all these things we got, this would be great for that. We start researching and trying to find them, and people in the library say, we don't have that stuff here anymore. It's gone.
So that is heartbreaking.
Yes, it is. I mean, and I'm going to have to be honest about this. That was the one sour thing that kind of hurt me about A&T, was that there was no one there who was aware or cognizant of the fact that this is some important stuff. I mean, these things are labeled. When you see something say Dr. Martin Luther King, you don't throw that away. But they threw that, it just tossed it somewhere in the landfill now, I guess. But either that or somebody took them home. But all I know is a guy, I can't remember his name either, he works in the library, and he did the research to try to find these things, went through the archives and every place else, nowhere to be found. So all of that material. And I'm sure they said there were things that would probably be one-liners today that people could be using, but they were gone. It's all gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really heartbreaking.
And like I say, it'd been different if we had copies. And the lady in the library thought she had copies, even though we told her, well, we can't copy it, but you can have the originals. I'm sure she probably figured out they got something, but she didn't throw them away. It wasn't her. She had stuff on the shelf over there. In fact, we went over there a couple of times and got things off the shelf and brought them back over to the station to pull parts out and use them in different things we were putting together. So I know they were there, but I just always assumed they'd be there.
Yeah. So kind of shifting to your into this, this creation of A&T's radio station. And it was you and three others, correct?
Mm-hmm.
You had this idea to create a radio station as
Right.
a project. What was the thinking going into, like, we're going to create a radio station?
Well, part of the reason was in order to graduate, they had these projects. Every student or a group of students had to have a master project they would do in order to graduate. And most of the students would do things like they'd go out and get somebody's old television or something and repair it and get it operational. That type of thing. And the main thing was if you could find somebody that had a brand new color TV, which was very rare. But if you could get that fixed, I mean, that was like a guaranteed A. See, my friend Guy and I, we worked at a little TV repair shop in Greensboro, so that was our part way of earning money. We fixed some things all the time, so that wasn't a big thing. But we were searching through the closets one day, and we saw this big piece of equipment in there, and we didn't know what it was. It had all these knobs on it, these round knobs on it. And so we asked Mr. Thomas Avery, who was one of our instructors, what he said, oh, that came from the radio station. Okay, it's an audio control board. And we're like, well, what does it do? Because we didn't really know. We'd never been on a radio station at that time. And he told us, and we were like, idea. We're going to put together a radio station. Right? Well, again, thinking that if we can get this board working, we're ready to broadcast. And then he said, no, that's not all you need. That'll just get you sound working. So he said, if you get that working and get it up and running for your class, your senior class project, and we weren't seniors, we were just sophomores at the time. He said, then I'll show you how to get the other parts that you'll need to get on the air. And we got it working. I mean, it had like 12 channels, and we got 10 of them working. Which wasn't bad. And we certainly didn't need that many on a radio station with one recorder. So, but it worked, and it worked fine, and he made sure that the audio sounded great. But he then told us how we could go about getting these little, what they call transmitters. And it was closed circuit type of thing. You go put one each transmitter in each building you want to broadcast to. And he got one of the deans to give us some money to buy 5 of them, and we bought 5, and we had them in the dorms on campus. And then we got connection with the phone company to run our audio, so we had phone lines that ran from the radio station to each of those buildings, and we go in there and could connect them up so that we could get our signal from there to the transmitter. So we started broadcasting. But that wasn't good enough for us. We wanted to be able to hear it when we go other places. So we took one of the transmitters. We had one that was what they call a 25-watt transmitter. Most of them were 10 and 5 watts. And we took the 25-watt and hooked it up on top of the building, hooked it up to an antenna on top of the building so we could broadcast out in the city. I mean, it still couldn't go very far, but it was far enough for if somebody had a car, they could actually pick it up in their car. And we started getting calls from people about it. They would listen to the radio station while they were riding around the city in their car. But someone from one of the local AM stations, WCOG, they reported us to the FCC. So
I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah,
I was hoping you would get there.
They reported us to the nobody even knew who we were. I mean, we had the license from the FCC to operate, like I said, maximum of 25 watts, but it was in a closed circuit format. So one of the FCC guys contacted Mr. Avery and said, either have them take it down or we're going to fine the university for it. So he told me, y'all got to cut. He didn't know when it was up. Like, what y'all mean? You got to transfer on top of the building. So we told him, wait. I mean, he said, well, I'm real proud of y'all guys. But he made us take it down. So we had to stop that. But that's how we got started with it. And we actually had the station up and running long before we were ready to graduate. So we started broadcasting in 1966. And like I said, because of the fact that we had programming, before they were just music, we were just getting on there playing music and stuff. But when Dr. Kennedy decided to make us start recording these people, we were like, man, we don't want to do that. We want to play music. She's like, no, this is things you're going to be proud of one day. So she had us record them, and we would schedule a time to put on. And we had a little news team there at the station. We had some students who, that's what they were interested in doing, is learning how to do news. So she taught them, that's part of what she had done at the other station. She was a reporter. So she taught them how to put together a news program. So we run the program, the news, and then get back to blues.
So once you, and I'm trying to figure out how to properly ask this question. I don't think there's a statute of limitations, but when the FCC called, what did that feel like?
We were scared. We thought we were going to jail. I mean, you know, man said the Federal Communications Commission called. Only thing we knew is we saw that name on their license on the board. It says Federal, you see, which was in the control room. It was posted. So he said the FCC guy called. And we were like, oh my goodness, we're going to jail. You know, but we wasn't here. They didn't just spank us on the hand, tell us to take it down. But it did scare us, you know. And see, it was only like three of us of the group who even, it was other people who worked there and other technology students who got in on the operation of the station once we had it up and running. But they knew nothing about what we were doing up there, putting that thing on top of the building. We created our own antenna, measured the antenna so that we sent the right, that it would send out the maximum amount of power, all that. I mean, it was stuff we learned in class how to do, how to adjust the length of antennas and things of that nature for reception and transmission. So that's why Mr. Avery said he was proud of us, because we had it up and running right. Because if it wasn't cut right, if it wasn't the right length, it would burn out the transmitter. So the other part we enjoyed was having to go to the dorms. If something was wrong with one of the transmitters, we get to go to the girls' dorm. You see, and, you know, very, very few guys got to go in the girls' dorm. So we had to go down in the basement where we had the transmitter. So we had to come in and say, man on the hall. And, you know, they let us in and we go down there. But, you know, you just get to go over there and see the pretty girls. And but, I mean, come on, we were students. We were young men. We were students.
Was it Dr. You said Dr. Avery was the...
It was Mr. Avery.
Mr. Avery, sorry.
He was a doctor as far as we were concerned.
Mr. Avery kind of was essentially, you know, he gave you the "I'm proud of you" kind of whisper.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how did it feel for you to get a call from the FCC? Not because you were necessarily like they called you, but you were getting complaints because another station is like, we're losing listeners to...
Oh, that made us feel good. Because the station, WCOG, they were basically what we call a top 40 station in those days. And a lot of top 40 stations were weren't sneaking it in, but they were integrating a lot of black music into their format, you know, especially the Motown stuff. You know, that would get on the air over there. But people who would listen to WCOG and they hear that music they like, and they found out we can hear this in the city. You know, it may be weak, but we can hear it. You know, so they were listening, and so we were taking a few of their listeners. So they just decided, well, let's get them off the air. They thought they were going to knock us off. Well, they did, but they knocked us out of the broadcasting out into the city, but not on campus. We continued to do that, and you could still pick it up riding through the campus because the transmitters the signal didn't stay inside the building. But once you got off of the campus, it was red without that little rig transmitter on top of the building. It was, like I say, it was a good feeling, but at the same time, it was scary to us because we just knew we were going to jail.
Well, we're glad you didn't. You create the station, you start, you know, Mr. Avery gets you up and running with the transmitters, and then what was the other woman's name that
Dr. Kinney.
Dr. Kinney is starting to get you in the mindset of programming. What was you know, for y'all, what was the idea for programming other than music?
Well, like I said, we had a little news team. They were really happy about the things we were recording. Of course, they never go there and record it, but we, the guys who dragged the recorders over there were me and Guy and another couple of other guys. But once they started gelling, so to speak, with the news and the public service and the programs that we were recording, a lot of people started listening, especially adults. We had more adults start listening, the faculty on campus, the people who ran the adults who were in charge of the dorms because they could hear it. So a lot of them started talking to Dr. Kenny about what we were programming and making suggestions and things. And we could see the station growing from just us getting on there playing on the air. Because for the most part, we were playing. We were just trying to emulate DJs that we'd heard on other radio stations. And, Dr. Kenny tried to get us to learn how to have your own personality on the air and develop that as opposed to just copying what someone else was doing. So a lot of us did that. We developed our own shows and our own personalities and got away from just trying to copy other. So a lot of myself and other guys who were with us, we went on to work in radio, local, starting off in the local radio station market. And, some of them, moved out when they went home or they graduated, whatever, they did the same thing. So we had the station that we got the original audio board from, WEAL 1510 AM. I actually got a job there before I graduated from A&T. I was working there as an announcer. And that was a learning experience because first thing they hired me to do was come in there and run baseball games. The radio station carried Baltimore Orioles baseball. So I had to go in there and learn how to run the board for that. But at that time, there was no way to communicate back and forth with the announcers. And that was a national broadcast, so they were on stations all across the country. But it was about timing. So I got this knack for timing things on, making sure that I did them at the right time so that people didn't miss into the game. Because if you were going to take a 30-second break, 60-second break, it had to be 30 or 60, so you had to watch that clock or whatever you were doing. So that helped me a lot through my career. I became a fanatic about time. People at WNAA said, Tony, if you don't put that ID on time for that plus or minus 2 minutes, he's going to come down on you. Because I knew that was the rule. It's plus or minus 2 minutes at the top of the hour. So, and then at the same time, the guys who owned that radio station had another station, an FM station called WQMG, and they played classical music. And because I had learned to play classical music in high school, I got the more I liked it. So I asked Mr. Ogle one day about any jobs down there. He said, well, I need somebody from midnight to 6 in the morning to run these tapes of classical music. I'm like, I'm the guy, right? I'll do that. And my girlfriend at the time, she said, how you going to study and do that? I said, it's 10-inch reels of tape. They just sit there and they just spin for, 30 minutes, and then I change them. I can study in between there. And it was in this building downtown called the Jefferson Building on the top floor, so you could see the whole city from there. Right? So I'd go down there at night and sit there and watch these tapes go. But the only thing I had to do was every half hour was turn the mic on and say WQMG Greensboro, boom, and keep it going, and then start the tape again and let it run. So I did that until I graduated. So I was working at 2 different radio stations at the same time. But eventually they started letting me do music at the AM station, so I didn't have to just sit there and do baseball games. So I'd come in on the weekends and do a regular show. Because that guy who hired me over there, he didn't know I had done a radio show at A&T, at WANT. So once he found out I'd done that, he was like, okay, well, let's try you out over here. So he let me do that. So that was the first paid job I had for announcing. It was at 1510. And it was, a lot of people don't realize what a daytimer is. Daytime radio stations, they have to sign off at a certain time of the evening. And the purpose of that is not because the company doesn't want to run stations all night. They would if they could. But they on certain frequencies, like 1510 is a daytime frequency, which means that any a station that's within 750 miles of another station can operate. In this market, 1510 is on WLAC out of Nashville, Tennessee. And what they do at that same time these other stations sign off is boost their power to 50,000 watts. Okay, on AM, that's a lot of power. Okay, but if you're within 750 miles of that station, you have to sign off the air, and that's what daytimers do. They all across the country. In fact, they still do it today. If you, like tonight, if you go home, if you want to listen to, you tune in to 1510, and you're sitting right here in Greensboro, you're going to pick up a station, you're going to pick up WLAC out of Nashville. You put it on 770 AM, you're going to pick up WABC out of New York City, okay? Because they're on the daytime frequency. They boost their power up. So that's a process that happens all across the country. So because of that, they want a certain number of hours that 1510 could play music. And that would change depending on the time of the year it was, especially when it gets to when daylight savings time kicks in, then you get the broadcast a little bit longer. But when during the normal Eastern Standard Time, it would vary sometimes by an hour or 30 minutes or whatever. It was ironic because when we used to broadcast these football games, if the game ran over, for whatever reason, there was a storm or something, they had to pause the game, or there was overtime or whatever. Sometimes we had to sign off the air before the game was over, because it got to that time where it was time for the station, us to sign off, and we'd be broadcasting the game, but click, you turn off. And people get mad at us. Why y'all turn the game off? We have no choice. We lose our license if we didn't turn it off. But that was a system that was put in place in the early days of radio, when you had large portions of the country that didn't have any radio at night. Okay, so the only way they had any radio entertainment was the FCC created that daytimer situation. So stations, you had people, especially in places like North Carolina. If you live in Red Springs, North Carolina, and I'm just using that for example, there was no radio for you to listen to after a certain time. But once those types of things were put in place, then that gave everybody radio listenership all 24 hours a day from somewhere. And I've gone off into another direction.
Oh, no, you're good. No, this is good because it's radio history that most people don't know. But, thinking about your time at 1510 and then QMG, which I did not know used to play classical music. Mm-hmm. What did you learn there? What did you learn there that would help set you up for, that next step at WNAA?
Well, I learned everything basically about radio broadcasting. The whole thing about programming. In fact, I later was program director at 1510 years later. I was also did talk show. They had a talk show there we called Sounder, and it was a 1-hour talk show, call-in talk show. So I ended up doing that for a while. So I learned how to do talk shows. But the thing that always stuck with me was that we carried network news. It was Sheridan Black Network, and before that it was called National Black Network. So I can't remember I do remember Sheridan Black Network. But it was a place where I could hear news about things that were going on in the world, in the country, that I wasn't going to hear on the local television station or the other local radio stations. They just weren't going to cover those stories. And I got hooked on that because I got to the point where I depended on that to help me through my life, how I looked at things. If something was happening in the civil rights movement, I was going to hear it on that network. Okay, and we were the only station that was broadcasting that in the market. Basically, we were the number one station among black people in this market. Okay, just one. There was nobody. I mean, AAA, you could still listen to them, but everybody listened to 1510 because it was local. But the guys who owned 1510, they were just, as long as we kept it up and running and doing the same thing we did today, and they were being able, the salespeople could sell spots. That was all they cared about. But there was another station here in this market that this guy owned, WMDE, and it was a FM country western station. And this guy, in fact, I jumped on Red Springs, but I think he was from Farmville, North Carolina, that owned it. He decided that he wanted to compete with 1510. So he decided that from 6 in the evening until 6 in the morning, he wanted to play black music. And then 6 in the morning to 6 at night, it was still country western, right? And it was in this big old, what we call it, the haunted house. It's a big old house on what's now MLK, but used to be Asheboro Street, where the station was located. And I'm serious about this. You could go in there and see a snake in there in a minute. It was just a big old abandoned house, and he put the radio station in it. And big old 700-foot tower right there in the backyard, right? And a lot of us who worked at 1510, we got jobs over there working, right? So we played music 24 hours, I mean, not 24 hours, but 6 to 6. There was no news, nothing, just strictly music. Well, the audience loved it. You know, they were listening to it. In fact, how I heard about it, I was stationed in Fayetteville, North Carolina, at Pope Air Force Base. And I picked it up on the radio one day down there in Fayetteville. And I'm like, I got to go over there and check this out. So when I got up here and I found out what they were doing, I'm like, okay, I'm part of it. You know, I'm part of it. But it's shifted the audience, the listenership, because our numbers at 1510 decreased substantially during the daytime, especially early morning when you come on with gospel and stuff like that, which is what we heard. People would listen to WMDE, and then they shifted over to us when we put 8 other stuff. And they went back to country western at 6 in the morning. But I noticed the shift in the audience, and I said, there's a problem here. We got to have a way to get news back in people's minds. I don't know if you're familiar with what's called the Clan Nazi movement here in Greensboro. I think it was 1979. I could have had the date wrong, but it was 79. There was this clash between these Klansmen and the Communist Workers' Party. It was a group of people who had formed, who were getting involved in the unions at the cotton mills. Okay, and they were trying to get people better paid and that type of thing. And you know, they had their ideologies, but you didn't have to agree with it. But they were working for a good cause. But anyway, they got drawn into this, had this movement, protest march at one of the, I can't remember, I won't say it was Morningside Homes, but I don't think that was it, but it was a black community. And they had, because of they were having that event, then the Klansmen heard about it, and they came down there and drove through the neighborhood, and gunfire was fired, and a couple of people got killed out there in the middle of the neighborhood. But I had gone down there for 1510 to record the event because it was a protester. Well, when all the shooting went down, you know, like, okay, this is big news. Now people from the network that we carried, the Black National Network, had heard about it. So they were calling for news reports. So I did a couple of reports for them. But at the same time, most of the people, black people in Greensboro, didn't know it even happened. It happened in their neighborhood because they were listening to other stations, and they weren't listening to 1510 anymore. So when they brought me on back to A&T to run WNAA, one of the first things I said I was going to do was put Newsrec on air. Okay, so we got to have news. If we can pull the audience with the music, we can teach them something at the same time. So that was, so my thing was information, entertainment, you know, while you're listening, and people caught on to it. They liked it, you know, and people started listening to the news again. We had a news team then, but we ended up losing that. I can get into that if you want to, but we ended up losing the news team. But that was how my first the things that I learned at working in commercial radio and then moving back to the campus radio station. That was my philosophy I brought with me, and I kept that all the time. We always got to have something on that informs people, you know.
Yeah. I actually did want to kind of shift into your time at WNAA, because so you graduated from A&T, you went to the Air Force. I did want to know, was that a conscious decision that you were like, I'm going to the Air Force?
No, they were still drafting people.
Okay.
They say I got drafted in the last round of draft before they cut it out altogether. And I was teaching in Edison, New Jersey, and I got a letter from the draft board saying to report for induction. And I'm like, no, wait a minute now. But they were supposed to give deferments for teachers. And so I called up the local draft board and told the lady, you know, so I'm teaching them in New Jersey. And her exact words were, I don't give a damn about New Jersey education. Those are her exact words. She said, I got a quota to fill, you got a letter, you got to show up in Charlotte. So when I got down to Charlotte, of course, I showed up. When I got down there, and they had all branches of the service going in for your physical. And I talked to this guy from the Air Force, and I asked him, because I knew my two brothers had been in the Air Force, and I'm thinking, I don't go to Vietnam. That ain't my thing, you know. And the guy from the Air Force, he told me, he said, look, if you sign up with me, I guarantee you won't be mine in a tank or nothing like that, okay? He said that you got a degree in electronics, I can keep you in electronics. That's all he needed to sell me. So, and again, my friend Guy, he was with me because he got drafted at the same time, so we both signed up for the Air Force. But that was, I think, that Vietnam thing don't sound too good, so I ended up over there anyway. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah. In researching and kind of knowing the history of that time, I was very curious to know, you know, if it was the unfortunate situation of being drafted.
Yeah, like I said, that was the last round of drafts.
Okay. So to shift, you do your time in the military. You come back, you get a call. Well, you were working in videography on A&T's campus.
When I came back, my friend Guy had gotten out of the service before I did. When I graduated, he was discharged early, and so he had gotten a job at A&T, but in the one of the departments there that had in the arts and sciences department, and they had hired him to put together they had these boxes in there with all this TV equipment, so they wanted this TV studio set up. Well, I got like a couple months after Guy did. When I got there, he was still sitting there looking at them boxes. So we put a plan together. We started breaking open these boxes. Neither one of us had ever put together a television studio, but we both had degrees in electronics, so we figured it can't be so hard. So we put the equipment together and got the TV studio up and running, and was a guy named the dean, Dr. Frank White. He was like happy because he spent all this money on this TV equipment and he didn't know what to do with it. So we got that up and running. So we ran that for a couple of years. Unfortunately, I was working on, my salary was paid through what they call soft money, which it ran out after a while. Guy's money was hard, mine was soft. And so when the money ran out, I went back to commercial radio and television. I worked in at WFMY Channel 2 for a couple of years there. And at the same time, still doing radio. Went back and did program directing at 1510. But I got called back to A&T for a job in the Agricultural Extension Service as a videographer. So I'm like, cool. So I could still work those jobs, okay, and work at A&T and Ag Extension. So I worked, as they say, 3 jobs. But I did that for 3 years, and then the Dean of Arts and Sciences asked me to come over there and help A&T get a new license and help build a new tower for the radio station. I worked with this guy, Dr. Richard Moore. He was the information officer for the university, and he asked me to help put together these grant applications. I mean, I worked, because Dr. Moore didn't know anything about radio. He was a newspaper guy, a PR guy. And I worked with him putting together these grant applications. And we got a grant from Kellogg Foundation, and one was from the government. I can't remember how government agencies have these little letters. I can't remember, it was National Public something. So we got 2 grants, one from Kellogg and one from the government to upgrade the radio station from 10 watts, which is what the FM was at 10 watts then, up to 10,000 watts. And Dr. Moore, I mean, he never gave me credit for any of that work. He took credit for the whole thing. That he didn't make it look like he submitted all these applications and put it all together. And because I was a staff person and he was Dr. Moore, he got all the credit for it. But I didn't really care as long as it got up and running. And so we did. We got the new license, and then the dean, Dr. DeLorda, asked me to manage the station. So that's what I did. So in '83, I came back over there and started running the radio station.
Okay. So when you came back, it was the idea was immediately to scale the station to a 10,000 watt station.
Well, I didn't know they were trying to do that. See, I was working in the TV studio because we had that up and running. And we had a master's degree program in media. So I was teaching grad classes and working in the TV studio. So the radio station was still on the air as a 10 watt FM, but the guy who was running it, they were playing all jazz that hardcore jazz, like blowing in a Coke bottle for 15 minutes type of stuff. Wasn't nobody listening. No one was listening to it. But he meant well, but he was a jazz guy, and he didn't let them play what the kids wanted to play. So, but that's what they were doing. But when they asked me about working to get upgraded, again, I was just working on that project. I had no idea they were going to ask me to actually run the station. So when they did, I'm like, yes, we can get some listeners, because they don't have any listening to Coke bottle jazz. They just don't. I tried to listen to it. It just, they play 30 minutes of Coltrane, back to back, and you'd be like, wow, that's some heavy listening there. And I like Coltrane, don't get me wrong, but that was the kind of deep jazz he was playing. And half the time the students wouldn't show up for the air shifts, so they'd be off the air a lot. But at 10 watts FM, nobody really cared. And there wasn't nobody listening. No one was listening. So, but once we got it back up and running, got the new tower up and new transmitters and all of that kind of stuff. So we were up and running for the game.
Okay. So in '83 is when you come back, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you take over. What was your initial role when?
I was manager of the radio station.
Okay. What was what were the goals for, you have this new 10,000 watt FM station. What is...
Bring in listeners. Let's get somebody to listen. That was the main thing the dean wanted to do. Because even when it was 10 watt FM, it was still under the School of Technology. Okay. It was in a different building in Price Hall. And no one else on campus had anything to do with the radio station except for people in technology. Well, the people in technology, it was just, hey, it's a radio station upstairs. They had nothing to do with it. They didn't care. They weren't even teaching that type of technology anymore, because they'd gone over to teaching integrated circuits and things that said, well, very little repair type of stuff was taught in there then. It was design, basically. So they had nothing to do with the radio station. It was just there and running. But, of course, it was a great opportunity for me, because I could get back to doing what I enjoyed doing with something I had helped start. So I jumped right on it, But the dean's main thing was, we got this thing now. It falls under arts and sciences, no longer under technology. So let's see if we can do it and bring in some audiences. And that thing was, y'all can do news and all this, which is what we did. We had a news team. He provided us with a news team. And I had 3 employees, 3 news director and 2 other reporters. Then, of course, program director, music director, receptionist. So all these people came under my purview. And that worked fine until 1991. In 1991, the state legislature decided they were going to take away all money for college radio stations, just stop funding them. And the reason for that was I guess, stupidity more than anything else. And they didn't mean any harm, but they were going by what they knew. And since the legislators were down in Raleigh, most of them listened to NPR, which is WUNC, and then they'd hear them do these fundraisers. And, WUNC raising $1 million, $500,000 doing their fundraiser. So they got to think, well, why are we using state money when radio stations are raising that kind of money? Well, the HBCU radio stations weren't raising that kind of money. Most of us didn't even have fundraisers on the air because our universities were funding us. But once they came up with that rule, that took all of the money away. So we ended up losing our news team because we couldn't fund them anymore. So we had to go to doing our own radiothons. And unfortunately, our audiences were not accustomed to giving money to radio. They listened to radio and suffered through commercials, and they enjoyed us because they didn't have to suffer through the commercials. So we get on there and start saying, we need you to help support us and, give us money for this radio station. That took a little bit of doing to get them to understand that. So we did radiothons for about 6-7 years, until we got to audience where they would give us money for it. Enough money, but we didn't have the money to continue with the news and all of that, so we lost that aspect. That's how we ended up putting on a program called The Bottom Line, which was a public affairs show. It was a call-in talk show because I remember, like I said, I did call in at 1510. So we started that show, and that was one of our longest. That show ran until maybe 2 years ago with the guy who we brought in as the announcer, host for the show, not the announcer, host for the show. He retired from A&T, but he worked that show all of those years, from I think it was 86, somewhere like that when we put that show on there. And Bottom Line was popular. I mean, we had listeners from every demographic you can think of who listened to that show because we covered all kinds of things, city government, county government, state, federal, whatever. If it was a story, we covered it. And people could call in and ask questions and talk to the guests who were on the show. A lot of people we had on the show then later on went on to become legislators and people like that. But it was an interesting show. It really was. I remember once when it was at Sound, we were doing Sounder at 1510. The guy who was doing it at that time, Gil Harris, he had this wild idea. He said he was going to bring in somebody from the Ku Klux Klan to be on the show. And we were like, you going to do what? I said, yeah, I'm going to talk to this guy about getting somebody to come on the show and do Sounder. We thought he was crazy. He was crazy. But he got them to agree to it. And the day that they were scheduled to come over there, the parking lots filled up with highway patrolmen, sheriff's deputies, police. I mean, everybody was over there. Law enforcement was everywhere. But the guys, they came in there and they did a show, and they were nice, they were cordial. They treated everybody with respect, but they had their philosophy, and they got on the air and they let it, of course, the phone calls. I was running the board at the time. I wasn't doing the show, wasn't hosting the show. I was just running the control board. And we had the delay system, of course. And I mean, I had to keep my finger on the delay. So I keep hitting it. People would call in, they'd say all kinds of things. But it just went to show that talk shows could be effective. When you can bring the Klan into an all-black station and an all-black audience, and people actually listen, and voice their opinions, and they actually treated us with respect when they came in and did the show. That was unusual. But back to Sounder, we tried to emulate that. I knew we wouldn't have brought the Klan in on there. A&T would have never allowed us to do that. But the same type of effect was there in terms of audience involvement, audience listenership. I remember it was some big controversy about the mayor of Greensboro one time, and out of all the shows we ever did, that was one show that was recordings of that show were requested more than anything else we ever did. I can't remember what it was about. It's been too long ago. But there was some big controversy about the mayor, and the mayor was there on the show and did show. So, but and we got requests all the way from Raleigh, from the governor's office about copies of that show. But like I said, I just can't remember what it was about.
Yeah.
Right.
You gave us so much, and I love it. There's so much I want to unpack, particularly around 91 when you lose that funding and you have to kind of like you're making a pivot, a real
big one,
big pivot. I read that you, within a week or two, you raised $60,000 to keep some of the program on. What was not necessarily the driving factor, but what was it that you jumped on for your listeners to be like?
Well, basically the university, the dean and the chancellor said, well, if y'all can't raise some money, we can't fund you anymore. So if you can't raise money, we're going to shut it down. We're going to just close it down. So I was sitting here one night, I didn't live here at the time, but I was thinking to myself, we can come up with something, a radiothon that'll make people want to give. So I came up with the SOS campaign, which is Save Our Station. And we came up, and that's what we started broadcasting. We let the listeners know what was happening, that we were going to go off the air. And people loved us. I mean, they listened to us. And so we started the SOS campaign, and within a week's worth of fundraising, we had raised over $60,000. I think it was like $63,000 or something like that. But let's see, a lot of the announcers who worked on our station, of course, they wanted to come and kick in, and they liked doing their shows. One of the most popular shows that we had on there, we still have on the air, it's called The Blues Hangover. Okay, and believe it or not, the majority of people who listen to The Blues Hangover are not black. Okay, in fact, none of our announcers have ever been black. Okay, but that whole group of people from the announcers and the Blues Preservation Society, they all kicked in and came in and helped work the phones and called people that they knew and generated money for the radio station. But people came up, they stepped up. Unfortunately, all of that was manual. There was no computers. We just didn't have them. So we had to do all that stuff by hand. And I jokingly, well, I wasn't joking, I was really kind of complaining to one of the ladies in the treasurer's office one day. I went over there before I left to deposit some funds. I said, I've been filling out these receipts, hand-printed receipts, okay, since 1991. All of the money that people give to the radio station with radiothons, underwriting, whatever, I have handwritten every receipt. And this was 2025. And I said, I've been writing them since 1991. And they said, that's a lot of books. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But, we appreciated the listeners stepping up. And so every year when we go back, and we changed the name of it from SOS to Ubiquity Campaign, okay? And people start asking, when y'all going to do your next Ubiquity fundraising? They just forget about the fact you can give us money anytime. But they wanted to do it during the campaign so they could hear the name on there. And we'd have like contests between churches, such and such a church gave this amount of money, members gave this amount of money. The other church go, oh, no, we're not going to let them beat us. And, and they'd try to outdo them, which was great. It was fun, but we raised the money that way. And every year, it started to decrease over the period of time. And it was okay, too, because the university was able to fund some of my employees through funding from another non-state fund, okay, which was okay, which that helped out a lot. So we didn't, and most of the money that we raised was for equipment, repairs, parts, things of that nature. But like I said, once I had that additional relief of my employees being taken care of, that allowed us to be able to do upgrades on our equipment. We changed everything to digital equipment. And new transmitters is expensive.
Yeah. You mentioned that you did the radiothons for about 6 or 7 years. What was the shift at, or what happened after 6 or 7 years?
Well, like I said, because we got the additional funding, we didn't really need to press as hard for it. We still had fundraisers, but they wouldn't be like week-long, all the phones ringing type of thing, because we just couldn't, people just didn't respond that well. And we were still taking checks. You see, a lot of people just don't write checks. You know, as everybody else was shifting to credit cards and things of that nature, I couldn't get people at A&T to shift us over to an electronic form of receipts. That's why I was writing so many handwritten receipts. And we had to write this receipt. I mean, if someone came in the door and say, here's 50 cents or your radio station, a handwritten receipt had to be generated for every dime, every penny that came in the door. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And you never knew when somebody was just, let me see if they're going to really deposit this money. And so I was adamant about that. If you came in and you gave me a nickel, I gave you a receipt that says 5 cents. It was simple as that.
Yeah. So kind of in that, you oversaw the growth of the radio station.
Mm-hmm.
You were...
Don't forget now, I was teaching at the same time.
And you were teaching. Yeah, because I definitely want to get to that. You oversaw the growth of the radio station while teaching.
Mm-hmm.
You were director, station manager, supervisor of funding, underwriting, and business support. And you were also assistant chief engineer.
All those jobs.
All those jobs. Was this at one time, or were these was this over a period of time?
Because one time, all of them, from day one. From day one.
How do you juggle that?
Well, I had a contract engineer. Great guy. I'd known him since I was working at 1510. He would come when there was something really pressing, we're off the air, lightning hit us or whatever, he would come in and certainly do his thing. Okay. But things that happened in the studio, for the most part, a lot of times I would take care of him because it wasn't a sense. He was engineer for several other radio commercial stations in the market. So he couldn't always drop what he was doing and come over and take care of us because we weren't going to lose any money if we weren't on the air, what the commercial stations would. But I could, keep things running until he could come in and do, if it was something I couldn't handle for whatever reason, then he'd come in and do that. So that wasn't something I had to do every day, but it was still a burden that I had to worry about juggling, getting this done in between teaching class. I taught 4 classes, and in between teaching 4 classes, doing the engineering, fundraising, FCC things, like license renewal. That's a year-long process, this license renewal itself. A lot of people you have to talk to, a lot of paperwork you have to generate to renew the license. So I had to plan for that. I look and I think license renewal for the station comes up next year, I think. I don't know what they're going to. But you had to plan for that. Just something as simple as getting, one of the requirements of license renewal is your owners, the station, well, the board of trustees owns the radio station technically. Their name is on the license. Well, every year the board of trustees basically changes. Over a period of a year, you may have 6, 7 new members. So the information that's required from those people that must be included in an application can get to be very involved and personal. So getting that, I don't know that information. So getting it out of the university and getting them to understand, the board members understand this is why you got to give up this information, can be time consuming. It takes some months before they get the information back to you. So in the meantime, that portion of the application, I had to keep postponing until I had all the information and ready to submit. But of course, it had to be submitted by a certain date. And then you have announcements you have to put on the air, letting people know that you're applying for a new license renewal and things of that nature. So it's very involved. It really is. It's not an easy process. But between that and, like I said, and then I was trying to do a show, still doing a show on the air. So that was fun. I could do that from here.
Because you ran, so you had, again, just trying to wrap my mind around all of these pieces. Mm-hmm. And then, and I think what I want to get at now is you were teaching the 4 classes. You also, from its inception and even through now, mm-hmm. you've always had students in the station. Mm-hmm. Would you consider WNAA a learning lab?
Oh, definitely. It was a training. In fact, that's what we referred to as a training facility. Okay, we were a learning lab because we were integrated into the curriculum in the department. Okay, because you had the department was divided up into production. You had news, you had PR. So as far as the production element of it, students who were majoring in the production side, they had to take radio classes. There were like 3 of them that they could take. You had television students who was concentrating in TV, but some of them wanted to take radio classes, in which I always encourage anyway when we had the space for them, because I say television is nothing without audio. So if you take this radio class and learn how to produce good audio, then you can produce better TV programs. Some of it took them a while for some of them to learn that. Yeah, like if people can't understand what you're saying I don't care how good your video is, you might as well have green people if you're gonna have bad audio. Okay, but so I always had basically full classes. The most advanced class, which is advanced audio editing, that I taught, it wasn't always full because a lot of students, they had the option of taking that or taking advanced television class, which made sense. They take that as opposed to advanced audio. But between those classes and teaching students, and then in addition to that, remember, we not only had students on there, we had volunteers. Most of our audience, most of our listeners, most of our announcers, okay, were actually community volunteers. Some of our longest running announcers, some of them are still there today, who started out back in 1983, still during their shows on the air. One of the guy that does the reggae show, he started that in '83, and he's still there doing his reggae show. Okay, years at it. Some of the guys who started the blues, who started working on the blues show, they're still there. Okay, but that wasn't something I had to deal with directly in terms of the announcers, because that was something our program director basically dealt with, bringing them in and who she was going to put on there and getting them trained well. But a lot of the training started in the radio classes, and then they would move up there to at first we used to allow them to do internships up there, but then some of the students decided, I can do an internship at a radio station. I don't have to go out in the city and look for that. So we stopped that, keep them from doing that. We'd rather them go out and get that diverse learning and being in a diverse learning environment. But we still had students who came that did what we call practicums. They could come up there and sign up for a practicum class and get that for one credit and learn how to do things in the station. And then a lot of those became announcers. But again, that was something program director Zima Murphy dealt with. But I always kept an eye on them. I'd always ear on them. I'd hear them if they said something I didn't like, or they missed the mark. Then I let her know, and then she's like, "Y'all don't want Tony on you," because I'll take people. I used to tell them all the time about the bottom line when they were doing that show. When I said Bob would sometimes want to talk over, so 11 o'clock you got to be off the air, right? And he'd want to ask somebody a question at 11:59. At 10:59. I say, "Look," they like, "We can't stop him. We tell him that." When it's time to play that exit, hit it. Turn his mic off, and you'll hear it go up. I say, at 11 o'clock, I want to hear an ID. As simple as that. I don't care who we was talking to. It won't take but a couple of times for him to learn that they're going to cut me off. that was my rule because I had to hit on time. And today, if it was still on there, it's no longer on there. But she learned that from me, that when it's time to go, it's time to go. So,
I did want to ask, because you mentioned the volunteers, and were the volunteers just showing up, or was there a call for people to come out?
No, we've never had to put a call out for people. I mean, it's always been a list of people who wanted to work on the radio station, especially the gospel show. We've always had announcers who, now some of them don't work out. Everybody doesn't know how radio works. They think you just put the music on and sit there and put your feet up on the desk and wait for it to finish playing. They don't realize you got a lot to do in between while that music is playing. Things, fill out the log and all that kind of stuff. And then some of them just don't understand how it works, period. But no, we never had a problem getting announcers. Except for getting black announcers for the blues. We had one guy who came in. I hate to lose this guy. He was excellent. I can't remember his name now. I'd know it if I heard it. But he had worked in Nashville, Tennessee, one of the AM stations there for years. He was like top guy in Nashville. But he had moved to Winston-Salem, I think. And he came back, he wanted to be part of the blues show. Right? And I'm like, great, great, we love it, right? So, we had him come in, sit in for a couple of weeks until he learned how I board and everything, how everything worked. And then let him fly. Well, that's what he did. He flew. He got on there and he started thinking he was on commercial radio, and he wanted to say things that we just can't say on non-commercial radio. And we hoped that he had already learned that, but he hadn't. But I gave him a couple of breaks, gave him a couple of times to straighten it out. But after the third week on the air, he was right back out there doing that same thing. And, I want to say hello to my friend down at Joe's Barbershop. And then, I'm just using that for example. You can't say that. Because if you say Joe's Barbershop, that's promotion. So that was the type of thing he was doing. So I let him go. But I loved the guy. He was great. He was a great, and when you hear his voice, it was like, this is radio voice. He had it, right? But I couldn't keep him because I had to let him go. He just wouldn't follow the rules. But like I say, we never had a problem getting announcers for any of the shows. And now, a lot of our announcers, some of them never even come into the station unless we have some special event, because they submit their shows through the internet to Ezema or email them to them. They do them at home where they got the equipment and they stack. They ain't got to worry about bringing nothing in there. They just submit the programs. And again, no problem, because you got a bunch of them sitting up on her desk, everybody wanting to submit their programs. But they have to meet certain standards and offer something that the other mix shows don't. And our mix shows are, I keep saying I'm no longer there. The mix shows are very popular. They really are, because people they can hear a lot of different music in a short period of time. And when you got good guys who know how to really mix, and I can't say just guys, because we got some ladies too, who really know how to mix well. And we got different kinds of shows. We got house music shows that mixes. A lot of R&B shows and gospel shows. So it covers the gamut of different types of genres of music that people like. And finding announcers for them is not a problem. Never has been. And they don't get a dime. We don't pay them a dime. We would if we could, but they do it for the love of it. But we also know that they make money, because if they submit their programs on the air and they promote themselves, they go out and they do their little events on the weekends or whatever. So I ain't got no problem with that. They make a living off of it. Who cares? As long as, we get the listeners and they make a few dollars. So.
Yeah. So a couple things that I heard you say, in particular, or kind of going back to the student aspect, how important is it for the students to kind of not just jump onto the radio, but learn all of those pieces from, working the boards to even learning how to do the underwriting and fundraising?
That part has never been important to students. learning the business part of it. For the most part, our students, they don't care. And to be perfectly honest, our students used to be more involved in wanting to learn the basic elements of radio than they are today. They come in and they want to learn how to be, especially those who want to be on the air. They just want to be on the air, and so their friends hear them on the air. A lot of them still don't get it that when that mic is open and you're talking, it's not just your friends in the dorm or at home listening to you. There are people all the way from Southern Virginia all the way to Piedmont, North Carolina who listen to you. Okay, so for you to be personal about things, those people don't know you. Okay, but they don't want to hear about your personal problems. Okay, so you got to talk to the entire audience and not just to your friends. Sometimes that's a hard thing to get students to understand. That is, and then when we explain to them, look, people in the military who in Thailand listen to this radio station. You think they care anything about your personal business? They don't. Okay. But like I say, today, the students seem less interested in learning the elements of radio as opposed to just wanting to be popular and get on the air and be people heard. But it hasn't always been that way. At one time, students used to come in there and it was like, he's even would call me, Tony, come explain such and such thing to these students, because they were inquisitive enough to want to ask, well, how does this work? How do y'all do this and that and the other? And if it was something I hadn't covered in a class, then they would do that. So, of course, the next time I go back to class, I'd cover it. Because students have questions about things we may, as an instructor, you may not think about. But like I say, it's not as, like underwriting, never had anybody say, I want to learn how y'all do the business part. They don't. That's just not something our students do. And they're the same way in all of the different elements of the program. If they're doing television, they just want to be on the air and be seen. They could care less how a camera works, okay, unless they're in the production side of it. Then, of course, they got to know that. Sometimes students would come in and bring me, Mr. Webb, I want you to look at this TV, this thing I did. And the first thing I see these green people, I'd be like, no, that's bad. That's not going to get it. But no. Come back and show it to me when you white balance before you bring it in here, okay? And see, they don't realize that I used to do TV for a living, so they just think, oh, he's in radio. I can show him anything, and he's going to enjoy it. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. But.
So that makes me think about a quote that you stated in an article. We put on the air. What we put on the air must be something that we are proud of.
Exactly.
How do you, with the students who are so excited to be on the air, to be popular, as you said, how do you instill, and maybe not just them, but in the staff, the volunteers, like how do you instill that sense of pride without them, or getting them to understand like this, you have to, as you said, you have to speak not just to your friends, your family, but you have to speak to this larger audience and be prideful about what we're putting, of the product we're putting out.
One of the things that we try to get all our students and community announcers to understand is that everything that goes out on the air, I don't care if it's a song or if you're speaking about something, okay, or telling someone about an event, it's got to be something that not only are you going to be proud to say, something the university is going to be proud that's coming out of the university, and something that alumni are going to be proud to say they heard on this radio station. Because alumni do listen. Now that they have the internet, they're on the internet, they do listen. And I think a lot of them get it after that. They like, well, if I'm going to play the song, is it going to offend anybody or anyone? If I tell the story about something that happened on television or I saw on the internet or whatever, is it going to be something that the chancellor's going to call Tony about? Is that they're going to like, whoa, why are you doing that? To explain how far that goes, during A&T's homecoming, the radio station always provides what we call a sound stage, and we had them play music for the band until the parade units go through and that type of thing. And one year, someone thought they heard one of our announcers mispronounced the chancellor's wife's name when they came through. Well, we had video. They didn't. We could listen to it. But someone thought they heard that. Oh, that was just, forget it. They called the chancellor's office, and said, look, they mispronounced your wife's name, and they called her such and such a thing. Well, stuff rolls downhill. So by the time it got to me, it was all convoluted and different from what it was when the person called and complained. But it just goes to show you that the people are listening. They do. I remember when, probably maybe the first or second year we were on the air, one of the young ladies did an announcement for the Foreign Languages Department, right? And she said the Department of Foreign Language at A&T is doing such and such a thing. Oh, somebody heard that. They called the chancellor's office, say, them people over the radio station, they don't even know the names of the departments on campus. Well, it was the Department of Foreign Languages. She said foreign language. They went off. People call about that, They don't know the names of the department. It was just one. The young lady, she knew it was foreign languages, but it just came out of her tongue that way in foreign language. Nobody even paid it any attention except for those people who were listening specifically. So, like I said, there are people who listen for different things, and if they don't hear it, they don't like what they hear. They don't ever call me directly. I always call the chancellor. They can find his number, even though we used to say my phone number when they hear all the time. Call me if you need this, but they take time to look up the chancellor's number to find.
You've had this long career with A&T's radio station.
Mm-hmm.
What? I'm trying to think. How do I want to put this question? How do you see WNAA as a different station than the other stations in Greensboro?
Well, from day one, I've always said we do not compete with commercial radio stations. We don't. We just provide an alternative that people are going to want to choose when they get tired of listening to other people. Okay? That's the bottom line. There's no competition. And that's why so many of our announcers have gotten hired at the local radio stations, QMG, 102 Jams, I never came but because the PD program directors at those stations would hear, they listen to us. And they know this is an announcer I think we can use at our station. But at the same time, they knew they weren't hearing anything coming out of WNAA that was putting them down in any way or trying to say that we were better than them, because we've never tried to do that. We've always just said we are in an alternative format. And we've always done that. Never tried to compete.
With it being essentially this space that you said, you're not going to compete. How do you see the value of WNAA to the community and the people listening?
Well, like I said, it is an alternative. It's a choice. I mean, it's just like now you turn on your TV, you got 300, 400 channels to watch. Why are you going to watch one over another one? You're going to see something, they always going to promote something that's going to pique your interest and make you decide that this is what you want to listen to. Especially when we have our music shows on. People change the radio dial all the time, and they may stop. We have people come through towns and they're just traveling, and they'll find the number for the radio station. They'll go, man, I was riding down here in the state, and I heard this station, man. Do y'all play this all the time? And it's just something they haven't heard somewhere else. Not to say that those stations don't play that same music. They just may not have heard it. They weren't listening to that station at that time. Because the commercial stations are going to play so many songs, then they're going to start over. Okay? Until they go back and they're going through their format or whatever's been programmed for them. And nowadays, a lot of them, there's no announcer there anyway. But we do that a lot. We have what announcers come in and just program their shows, and then we put it on the air, and the announcers at the club with you. They're not there at the station. It's called voice tracking. So they just come in and do the voice, give you the name of the song, back sell it, front sell it, whatever. But they're going to do a PSA, do that. 15, 20 minutes, and they're gone. And then they got Ezema goes in there and makes it into a 3-hour show by putting the music in between their voices. But like I said, you see them in the grocery store. I just heard you on the radio. That's because it's voice track. Well, commercial stations do that more than we do. And since so many of them are owned by one company, you could have one announcer and be on 200 stations at the same time all across the country. So, but that's the thing about technology. It's just different. So you have to program differently.
Yeah. What is important to you about WNAA?
It's important. What's important to me? What's important to me is that it is something that is original for A&T. Okay. Most colleges have radio stations these days, but a lot of them, like I say, are just there for PR for the universities. Okay, especially if they got NPR, okay, which I love NPR, ain't nothing wrong with that. Okay, but I remember one time there was a push from people on campus say, well, we need to make WNAA an NPR station. And I'm like, why? What are we going to do with it? They're like, what do you mean? You'd be NPR station? I say, yeah, but if you turn your radio on right now, you can tune in to Winston-Salem, Wake Forest's radio NPR station. You can tune in to Chapel Hill, okay? You can tune in to NCCU. You can tune in to Winston-Salem State radio station and one out of Roanoke, Virginia. All come into this market. What are we going to do with an NPR? So we can't compete with them. We can't play the same programs at the same time. That's just ain't going to happen. So they're like, oh, okay. But people, my thinking is that, like I say, we are original. We never tried to be like anyone else. We run some, I keep saying we, like I still work there. They still run some NPR programming that we pay for to bring those programs in and offer things that we can't generate ourselves. But they just provide us with another alternative because they aren't the same NPR programs that you're going to hear on WFDD out in Winston-Salem or WUNC. You're not going to hear those shows. And that's how those program producers survive, is because they produce alternative programming that they know the big NPR stations are not going to broadcast. So by us offering those types of alternatives, that's why I say A&T is original, because we try to find something on this outside of the norm.
Yeah. So you mentioned these other college radio stations. How would you define HBCU radio, how would you define HBCU radio more broadly?
In the broad sense, I think overall all of them want to do the same kinds of things that we do. But a lot of times it's not available to them because, as I mentioned, their upper administrations want them to compete with the stations that are NPR. So even if they aren't NPR stations, okay, or public radio stations, put it like this, they want them to emulate that. And I've seen it happen, and I won't say who, but I'll say a local radio station that tried to emulate NPR, public radio. It has failed. And they won't admit that it's failed, but it has, because there's you got to just look at the listenership. Only time the listenership on that station exists at all is when they're doing local shows, like maybe a jazz show, okay, and they're not blowing in Coke bottles, but a good jazz show. But any other time, the programs that they have chosen as alternatives to the music programming don't track well, okay, because of the fact that they're still trying to have that, we're a public radio station, and nothing wrong with being a public radio station. But we're not a public radio station, but we offer public radio programming. And that's how you have to do it. You can't continue to try to compete with somebody else. And that's what I see with a lot of the HBCU radio stations across the country, is that I can't say it's because their local management or programmers want to be that way, but you can tell when there's force from the top that's saying, this is what we want you to do and this is what we want you to be. That's how we want you to project. I always had that problem at A&T, is that I always had to be cognizant of how our administration was going to react to what we had on the air. And I always tried to make sure that we didn't put anything on that was going to embarrass them, okay, or make the university ashamed of what we were doing, as we were talking about before. And I think the fact that I, being the manager from 1983 to 2025, never being fined for anything, never even getting on the FCC's radar.
Except for that one time.
Except for that one time when I was a student. Never being on their radar. I think that's something that if anybody at the university really cared about, that would be something they could be proud of. They say, we ran this radio station all these years, and not one time did anyone from the federal government complain about anything that we had on this station. And like I said, that's something I certainly pride myself on. But it wasn't just me alone. Of course, it was people keeping up the standards that I had set. You know, program director, and when we were doing news, the news director, the public affairs shows and all that, they always kept that in mind. That was the reason Dr. Bob was on the show for so long, because he actually taught, I think I'm going to say it was psychology department, but it may not have been psychology, I can't remember. But he was also he was a tenured faculty member, so he knew how far to go with the university. Okay, I can say and do this, but I can't go there. You know, somebody would call in and start saying, man, y'all at A&T, you need to do this. He would put brakes on them. You know, like, wait a minute, let's just go in this direction. Because if there's something wrong, then there's a process you can use to file a complaint, you know, about the university if you have one, a legitimate complaint. But to just foul mouth the university on air, that's not the way to handle it, because we try to do positive things here. And most of the time they'd come back around like, yeah, well, I didn't really mean to go there. You know, so we were able to keep it there.
Yeah. We see this landscape, this technological landscape starting to shift, or it has shifted, particularly over your time, your tenure. You started there, 66, but then 83 to 2025. Why do you still see HBCU radio as relevant and valuable, even with this technological shift of like podcasting or streaming? How do where do you see HBCU radio still fitting in this landscape?
I think radio in general, okay, has a role to play in spite of all the technology that exists. And the reason is because radio is the one thing that is passive. You don't have to do anything to listen and enjoy radio other than turn it on. Okay, you don't have to sit there and flip your fingers to get to a certain image or whatever. You don't have to use a remote to flip through channels. If you hear something on radio you like, or there's a station you like, you put it on there and you turn it on. You can wash the car, you can put headphones on, ride on your lawnmower, listen to radio. It's passive. There's no other medium like that. So you can't ride on the lawnmower and be on the internet. Okay? You just can't, because you're going to hear something, or you want to turn to something else because you heard something. You got to stop the lawnmower and go and find it. Okay? Can't do that. Okay? And I think, unfortunately, because of the climate, like you say, today, we never know when the internet's going to be shut down. There's somebody one day is going to push the button. They're going to shut it all down, and people are going to lose their minds. Okay? I hope that never happens, but I see it coming. We already see it now with people experimenting, shutting down power plants and water processing, things of that nature. when they do that, there's going to be a need for, and when they do it, your TVs and stuff, most of them aren't going to work either. Okay, but there are a group of radio stations that will be able to continue to operate without the internet. Okay, may not have the same programming that they had before, but they'll be able to operate. Okay, and they're going to be in a position to continue to provide information and programming to the listeners. And I'm hoping that HBCUs will be able to play a role in that, because the majority of them, like I said, don't depend on programming from the internet to operate.
Yeah. So I want to shift, as we're talking about HBCU radio, I want to ask, how do you feel about the HBCU Preservation Project?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and why do you think the work that we're doing is important?
I think it's great. I really do. Because for the same reason I was proud of all the stuff that we drug that Ampeg 600 over there to record, that's no longer exist. Somewhere out there's some stations that do have that kind of information. They will be able to provide that information for perpetuity. And to have it all housed in one particular place where if someone wants that information, there's a central location they can call into and get it. Like I say, I lost my interest in working with it when I found out that I didn't have anything to offer. Okay. Prior to that, I was really interested in being part of it, but I just lost that when I realized that ENT had destroyed all our material. I didn't feel like I had anything to offer. But the existence of the organization and the purpose of the organization, I've always thought that was great. It really was. When, like I say, that lady first asked me about it, I was all for it. She called me, we'd talk about different things, what I was going to pull together and how to do it. But like I said, I was gung-ho about that. But once I found out I didn't have it anymore, then that kind of killed my spirit. But that did not kill my feelings about the organization. So I think it's great. I love that.
You know, thank you. I want to. There are a couple more questions I want to ask. One, I want to ask you. You retired in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
You did your final show. Was it a conscious thought to say, I'm not going to sign off, I'm not going to say goodbye, we're just going to leave it here?
No, I actually did my last show. I didn't wait until the last month I was working there. I did my last show last March, okay, even though I didn't retire until June. And for personal health reasons, okay, I just didn't feel like doing it anymore, okay. Again, like I said, it had nothing to do with the radio station itself. It was just my health said, no, you just don't have the mindset to continue to do it. So most people, they never knew it was the last show that I did. I just did my last show and just never came back.
Yeah.
You know, he's even kept saying, no, Tony, you got to do it now, last show, and let everybody know. Like, no, that ain't what this is about. When I first opened the mic, back when I was a student, nobody knew who I was and what was going on. I ended it the same way. I just did my last show and walked away from the on-the-air part. I mean, I continued to run the radio station until I graduated, until I retired. But no, on the air, I just never did another show.
Yeah. So with this long tenure,
Mm-hmm.
how do you see your legacy with, I don't even want to say just WNAA, but with A&T?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that being,
Well, like I said, because I love A&T, I don't want to really say what I really feel about legacy as far as A&T is concerned. I would hope that at some point in time someone would say, we can't forget what Tony Welborne did here at the radio station or with broadcasting at A&T. I would hope that somebody would say that. But it's not something I would promote I'm just not that type of person to go out there and blow my horn. That ain't what I do. But I have always felt like everything I do, I want to do it in such a way that somewhere, some point in time, somebody would say, that was a good thing. Okay, that was great. Who did that? Then somebody could say, Tony did it. Okay, but he didn't do it because he wanted me to notice. He did it because it was the right thing to do, or it was the best thing to do at that time. And that's how I was the whole time I was at A&T. If it wasn't for people wanting to do a story about how we got the radio station started and all that kind of, I don't go around promoting it. I don't say it. I just, all the years, most of the students who went through my classes at A&T, a lot of them never knew I had anything to do with starting a radio station. It wasn't something I promoted. Just go upstairs and learn how to do something. That was my thing. And if you can do that and you do it well, I can stick my. I see. I don't know if you know this guy Terrence Jenkins. He's one of my former students. He comes back now and then for homecoming or whatever, and he's always glad to see everybody that he knows and whatever. But Terrence started there at the radio station, but students would say something about, well, there's some guy coming for homecoming. They wants to come to the thing for Terrence Jenkins. Who is that? They don't know. Okay, but it's somebody that's sat in that same seat you're sitting in now, but that person was there and he did something with it. And we got a lot of students like that. I was telling the lady I was talking to the other day, I asked her where she was from. She said she was from Texas. And I said, well, are you familiar with an announcer named the Mad Hatter? She's like, yeah, I know the Mad Hatter. I'm like, well, he's one of our former. He was in Houston. He was the number one announcer in Houston for, I think, maybe 15 years or so. Okay. She wasn't from Houston. She lived in some other city that she could pick up that station. But she was just so excited to know that that's one of your former students. I was like, yeah. But they do well. And everybody associated with A&T and with the radio station is always happy when we learn that other students have gone on, or students have gone on to make it big. I had a young lady work with me named Cherie Lofton. She was my program director for years. Unfortunately, she passed back about 4 or 5 years ago. Cherie knew everybody. She knew, and see, her father was in radio for a long time. In fact, he was very active in getting Shaw University's radio station started. And so growing up as a child, she had a father who worked in radio and also was a promoter for one of the record labels. So she knew all of the announcers. I mean, not the announcers, but recording artists. She knew them. And they'd come, she'd have them come to the station and they would do things and put little promotions on there and all that kind of stuff. She really knew more about different performers than I'd ever know. I mean, I sit there and play the music all day long, but Cherie would know them personally, okay, because she had dealt with them when she was a child, growing up with her dad, and he'd drag her around to different places. But it was that type of knitting that held us together, because with Cherie and the other members of the staff, everybody gravitated toward her because they knew that she could bring them closer to not only what was on the air, but make it personal by bringing people in. She brought one of the guys came to one time. Well, I know his name. I ain't gonna say his name, but I put it like this: wears a clock around his neck all the time. But he came to the station. She had him come in there, and he came in. They were doing a little thing, signing autographs and all of that. And he went back there and got on the air with the announcer who was on there, and he said, I want to say, how are you? And I won't say it, well, bitches at A&T, right? I heard that. I came out of my office, right? I like, no, that's not what goes on here. And I went back there and I pulled him out, closed the door to the control room. I said, look, first off, you don't say that on the air. But more importantly, you don't call our young ladies at A&T bitches. That's not what they are. Yeah, you know, man, boy, I'm like, no, that ain't happening. You can leave, right? And those students like, you throwing him out? Yes. because he's done. Okay, that just wasn't what we do at A&T, and we certainly don't do it on our radio station. Now, some of those people you're talking to probably never heard it. Okay, maybe never will hear it, but somebody did. And there's some young lady out there who heard that and said, that ain't me. I don't like being called that. I don't like a radio station calling me that. But that was how far I was willing to go, you know. But Cherie never invited him back. He never came back again, you know. We had another young lady, Yvonne Anderson. She was program director before Cherie. And she would have, when the promoters would come around, Yvonne wouldn't break her neck getting out there, bringing them in her office to talk to them. Because she was saying, look, we're going to do them a favor by playing their music. There was one guy, and he used to have I can't remember his name now, but he's big-time music producer. Had a TV show on BET. He used to come there a couple of times a year, and he'd come in to see Yvonne, and he'd sit there on the couch, and he'd wait for her all day long. If she took 3, 4 o'clock before she got around to him, he'd just sit there and wait for her. Now, talk to people and be polite and stuff. But he wanted her to play his record. He'd reach out in his bag and pull out his big 12-inch and say, look, this group here going to be popping, you know, I want you to play them so. She said, okay, I'll get around to it. You know, and she might, if it was something good. But that guy, like I say, later on went on to have his own TV show on BET. But he was always a nice guy, you know. But the thing was that we had something to offer them that they wanted from us because they knew they couldn't get it at the other commercial stations. Well, no sense in them going over there. The program director would have never seen them, okay? But he selling records out of the trunk of his car, you know. But he could get them played on 90.1, and that's what he would do. So it's all kinds of things that come together to make a radio station. But more importantly, non-commercial radio plays a different role than commercial radio because I've worked both, and I know. When I worked at 1510 and QMG for a while, I worked there when it wasn't classical music too. But people like that would come in and want the PD to put their music or the MD to put their music on there. I mean, they'd be all over themselves, you know, to get it. Sometimes there were incentives, which they shouldn't have been involved with, but they get on the air. They get their music played. But there would be other people coming in from some small record label that ain't nobody ever heard of, and they wanted a snowball's chance. They were going to get their stuff on the air because they had nothing to offer. Okay, regardless of how good the artists or the performers may have been, they just weren't going to get played on that commercial station. But they come to 90.1 and, well, okay, we give them a chance. You know, we'll play them and see. Or just to let you know, they'll let you know whether or not this is either playing or not. Where one of the guys I had, and I'm going to shut up, at 1510, when I first started working there, we had this guy, he was very popular. He was the number one announcer in the area at that time. And he came with this idea that he was going to do a show he called Make It or Break It. And we were still playing vinyl, right? So he pulled out this 45 and put it on the turntable. He'd play it and then have people call in and say, you know, make it or break it. Right? You know, it was cute, you know. But I would come on right after him, right? So when I got there early, I'm in there prepping my show, and I said, you can't do that without using delay. Okay, you got to use a delay system when you put them calls on there. Oh, no, I'm so and so. Mm-hmm. Well, he played a song, and it was terrible. But somebody called in and said, break that MF. It's there right on there, right? That was it. You know, Ike was no longer there. Lost his job that quick because people heard it, you know, and bing, ding, phone started lighting up. They weren't calling in for make it or break it. They were calling in to complain about what they heard on the air. But, you know, like I say, all kinds of, that was commercial radio. all kinds of things come together to make a radio station, and different things come together for non-commercial, and that's what I always try to get everybody to understand. If you can work non-commercial radio, you can work commercial radio. Okay, because all you got to do is learn how to take them breaks. As long as you take those breaks at the right time, you'll be all right. Because learning how to announce part, what to say and how to say it, is something you can learn in non-commercial radio. But it's going to be hard for you to get into commercial radio if you don't know how to even talk. Mm-hmm. You don't know how to pull things together. Remember the things that are important: time, temperature, weather, things of that nature. You learn that in non-commercial radio. You can't forget that in commercial radio, especially if you work in mornings. You know, people sitting there listening to you and they want to know how much time I got for the school bus to get here. You got to let them know what time it is. Okay, how I need to dress my child. You got to know what the weather is. You know, music's fine. I love it. I hear it. But give me that information. And that's something we've always done at 90.1. Gave people information and entertainment.
Beautiful. If you don't toot your own horn, we will definitely toot your own horn to tell.
I'm not looking for it to be tooted. Really not.
Because we understand, or I understand the importance of the story of someone who started a radio station, particularly A&T's radio station, and it's a wonderful story. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
My last question.
Mm-hmm.
I like to ask, what is the one grain of salt that you want to leave in the world?
I really don't know. I never thought about it. One grain of salt. Nothing that I can think of.
Okay.
I really can't.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.